My brother married my cheating ex-girlfriend, she got pregnant, and then demanded I forget the past and reconcile. My older brother ended up marrying my ex-girlfriend, who had cheated on me. Not long after, she got pregnant and started pushing me to let the past go and make peace with her. At first, I thought, sure, people can grow and change. But now? I'm convinced of one thing: cheaters don't change. Even the toughest criminals might turn their lives around, but when it comes to cheaters, they'll just keep doing what they do best. My brother learned that the hard way. When I tried to warn him about her, he called me a liar and refused to believe what I said about his beloved wife. It still stings. It's always the ones closest to you, right? And how did I know she was a cheater? Well, because she cheated on me. Her cheating escapades were so outrageous they sounded like something out of a bad soap opera. But let me break it down for you, starting from the beginning. Her name was Tasha. She was 32 at the time, and now, thankfully, I can say she's my ex-girlfriend and my brother's ex-wife. Back when we were dating, she cheated on me with none other than my brother, Noah. I told him she couldn't be trusted, begged him not to marry her, but of course, he didn't listen. Tasha had dollar signs in her eyes. She was clearly in it for his money. I refused to attend their wedding, and that decision created a major rift between us. Fast forward to when she got pregnant. My mom urged me to reconcile, so I tried for her sake. Big mistake. Turns out, Tasha hadn't changed a bit. When the baby was born, the kid didn't even look like Noah, and he finally had to face the truth. A paternity test proved it: he wasn't the father. Let me backtrack and explain how I got tangled up with someone like Tasha in the first place. Honestly, I wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed back then. I was just a guy desperate for validation. I wanted a hot girlfriend to flaunt, and Tasha fit the bill. I was kind of a loser in high school, so having someone like her on my arm felt like proof I'd finally made it. I even splurged on a fancy car just to impress her. But man, the red flags were there from the start. She was constantly paranoid, always checking my phone, calling me nonstop to see where I was, and flat out forbidding me from talking to any other women. I thought I could fix things by making her feel more secure, so I introduced her to my close friends and family. That backfired spectacularly. The moment my friends met her, they told me to run, said she was bad news and I should cut ties immediately. I brushed them off, thinking they were just jealous. I even defended her when things got heated. Looking back, I was delusional. Eventually, I introduced her to my parents and my older brother, Noah, who's 3 years older than me but still acts like he's in high school half the time. I thought bringing her along on a family weekend trip to the beach would help solidify our relationship. Boy, was I wrong. The trip was a disaster. Tasha accused me of checking out some random woman in a bikini, totally untrue, and slapped me in front of everyone before storming off. I was so mad I didn't bother chasing after her, but after a while, I started to worry. I searched everywhere but couldn't find her. My parents were off shopping in town, so I figured she might have gone back to the beach house. When I walked in, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was Tasha, half naked on the couch with Noah, doing things I can't unsee. I completely lost it. And you know what her excuse was? She actually blamed me. She said it never would have happened if I hadn't been looking at other women. For the record, I wasn't. But I guess she thought everyone operated the way she did. As for Noah, his excuse was laughable. He claimed he didn't think Tasha was a good match for me and that they'd be better off together. I was furious at both of them and left. I couldn't just let it go, though. After doing some digging, I found out that Tasha had been flirting with multiple guys the whole time we were together. She'd let them take her out to fancy dinners and buy her expensive gifts. I guess I was just another one of those suckers. I tried to warn Noah, begged him not to marry her, but he wouldn't hear it. A few months later, I got an invitation to their wedding. I was floored. Noah was actually marrying this woman, a cheater, a gold digger, and a liar, after barely knowing her. I knew it was going to end in heartbreak, but he was too blinded by whatever spell she had him under. I even gathered proof, texts, photos, everything, to show Noah exactly who he was marrying. But he brushed it all off, saying Tasha had come clean about her past and just wanted to find the right guy. Apparently, my brother thought he was the one. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. Tasha had somehow convinced Noah that he was the one for her, and before I knew it, they were planning a wedding. Everything she said sounded like complete nonsense to me, but Noah was so blinded by what he thought was love that he ate it all up. Here's the thing about my brother, he's always been a big spender. Not that it's a problem for us, we're fortunate enough to be doing well financially. Noah earns a solid income, but he also gets support from our parents. We don't worry about rent because my dad owns a bunch of apartment buildings, and we all live in units he bought years ago. My dad's a real estate investor, and the rental income keeps things comfortable for the whole family. Life's been pretty sweet for us, and I have no doubt Tasha had her eye on that lifestyle from the start. Tasha was nothing short of a gold digger. She made sure Noah threw the biggest, most extravagant wedding you could imagine. And guess whose money she burned through? A hefty chunk of my dad's. To make it worse, she invited a bunch of men she'd been with before. Seriously, almost a quarter of the wedding guests had slept with her at some point. The rest were her oddball friends and a mix of our extended family. Let's just say my family wasn't thrilled about the wedding. My mom, being the kind-hearted person she is, just wanted Noah to be happy, but my dad? He hated Tasha and was completely against the marriage from the beginning. As for Tasha's family, they didn't even show up. Turns out, they'd disowned her for reasons I can only imagine. When the invitation arrived, I didn't hesitate to decline. There was no way I was going to watch my ex-girlfriend marry my brother. Noah called me, practically begging me to come, but I stood my ground. I told him straight up that I wasn't about to attend my ex's wedding. He accused me of being jealous, said I couldn't handle seeing him happy. That was the last conversation we had for 5 long years. Then, out of the blue, my mom called me recently. She said Noah wanted to reconcile. I told her if he wanted to talk, he needed to reach out to me directly, not through her. She promised to tell him that, but she also pleaded with me to give him a chance. I wasn't exactly eager, but I agreed to try. A couple of days later, Noah called me. He told me Tasha was pregnant and went on about how their marriage had lasted 5 years without any issues. He sounded smug, like he wanted to prove me wrong. He said I should move on from the past and reconcile with him so we could all welcome the new baby together. So, I decided to visit them. On the surface, they seemed like a happy, normal family. Noah couldn't resist taking jabs at me, though. He made fun of the fact that I was still single and even went so far as to thank me for introducing him to Tasha. He gave me credit for his perfect family. The whole interaction made my blood boil, and I was determined to find out the truth. I couldn't believe their relationship had lasted this long, but I knew better than to trust Tasha. So, I started digging. Unsurprisingly, I found out she'd been cheating on Noah repeatedly. She'd been spotted checking into hotels with other men, and I had all the proof to back it up. Screenshots, texts, you name it. One of the guys, John, he's 40, reached out to me after things went south between him and Tasha. He showed me screenshots of her texting other guys and admitted he had no idea she was married. He told me Tasha had used him for fancy dinners and shopping sprees while Noah was out of town. Thanks to John, I had everything I needed to prove Tasha was up to no good. Then one day, Tasha called me, saying there was an emergency and she was home alone. Since she was pregnant, I didn't want to leave her stranded, so I went over. When I got there, she told me Noah was at work and then dropped a bombshell. She said she knew I'd been asking around about her and offered to sleep with me if I kept quiet about what I'd found. She even invited me to the bedroom. I was disgusted. I declined and left immediately, but what happened next blindsided me. She twisted the story and told Noah that I had propositioned her. She claimed I'd blackmailed her, saying I'd tell Noah the truth about her unless she slept with me. When Noah confronted me, I told him exactly what had happened, that Tasha had called me over and tried to strike that sick deal. But he wouldn't believe me. I tried showing him the evidence I'd gathered, but he was too angry to listen. Desperate, I turned to my parents, hoping they could knock some sense into him. My mom tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't budge. He was furious that I'd involved the family, and it only made him dig his heels in further. My mom was heartbroken. She didn't want Noah stuck in a bad marriage, especially with a baby on the way. My dad, on the other hand, didn't have much sympathy. He thought Noah was being an idiot for ignoring all the red flags. I couldn't argue with him there. Noah wasn't just gullible anymore, he was being downright foolish. Still, my mom did her best to talk to Noah and convince him that Tasha wasn't who he thought she was. Noah convinced himself that I had influenced our mom into believing Tasha was a cheater and that all the evidence I showed her was fake. He got so mad at her that, to keep the peace and get him to talk to her again, she gave in and pretended to believe Tasha was innocent. At that point, I realized there was no point in trying to convince someone who didn't want to face the truth, so I distanced myself from Noah and his wife. He was already furious with me, convinced I'd tried to seduce Tasha. A few months went by, and I got a call from Noah. Tasha was in labor, and he was panicking. My parents were stuck in another state because of bad weather, and their flights had been cancelled. Noah didn't know what to do, and even though things between us were tense, I went to be there for him. It was a long and complicated delivery, but in the end, Tasha and Noah welcomed a baby boy. I was genuinely happy for them at first, but when I saw the baby, something felt off. He had features that neither Noah nor Tasha had, features that couldn't be explained by genetics. The baby's eyes, for instance, they had a distinct shape, almost like he could have been of Asian descent. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was just the way newborns look, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling. Over the next couple of days, as I spent more time with them, the uneasiness grew stronger. The baby didn't look like Noah at all. And I wasn't the only one noticing it. Noah's behavior had shifted. He seemed distant from the baby, as if he already knew. A few days later, Noah showed up at my place. He looked exhausted and finally addressed the elephant in the room. He admitted he didn't feel like the baby was his and that Tasha had probably cheated on him. He also mentioned that they'd been careful about using protection, but Tasha had brushed it off, claiming it had failed. That's when I pulled out all the evidence I'd gathered over the years, photos, texts, and everything in between. Noah spent the night looking through it all, sobbing uncontrollably. It was hard to watch, but he needed to see the truth. Meanwhile, Tasha kept calling him over and over, unable to handle the baby on her own. I told Noah he needed to get a paternity test to be absolutely certain. A few days later, the results came in. He wasn't the father. Noah was devastated. He called the entire family over to confront Tasha, not wanting to face her alone. When the moment came, Tasha had no defense. The evidence was overwhelming, but she still tried to play the victim. She screamed, accused Noah of betraying her trust by doing the test behind her back, and threw a massive tantrum. She even woke the baby with all her shouting. After the confrontation, Noah packed up and went to stay at our parents' house for a few days, taking the baby with him. He didn't trust Tasha to care for the child in her current state. I noticed that Noah was starting to form a bond with the baby, and my parents were too. Noah wasted no time filing for divorce. At first, Tasha outright denied cheating and accused him of faking the DNA results. When a second test confirmed the truth, she switched tactics, claiming the baby was conceived through IVF with a sperm donor. She couldn't back up her story, and the court granted Noah the divorce on grounds of adultery. Tasha demanded child support and spousal maintenance, but the court shut her down. Since the baby wasn't Noah's, he had no legal obligation to pay. After that, Tasha started blowing up my phone, blaming the entire divorce on me. She also begged Noah to take her back, claiming she had nowhere else to go. Despite everything, my parents took pity on her. They offered to let her and the baby stay with them for a couple of weeks until she could find a job and a place to live. Personally, I think she doesn't deserve their kindness, but my parents have always been good-hearted people. As for me, I still can't believe my brother was so gullible. Tasha cheated on me with him, and he married her despite all my warnings. When I tried to show him the truth, he chose to believe her lies over me. He even thought I tried to sleep with her. How messed up is that? Part of me feels like I should cut ties with him completely. The only reason I stayed in contact this long was that I wanted to prove I was right all along. And now that I've done that, I feel this twisted sense of satisfaction. The truth is out, and I was vindicated. Sometimes, I even find it funny. I get the urge to bring it up just to see the look on his face, to remind him how wrong he was. I know that makes me sound like an asshole, but I can't help how I feel. My brother hasn't exactly been an angel toward me either. I've been torn about whether I should cut ties with him altogether or just keep things distant. For those of you following along, this is an update about the mess involving my brother and his ex-wife, who also happens to be my ex-girlfriend. Wild, right? What's even crazier is that she got pregnant by cheating, my brother divorced her, and then my parents gave her one of their apartments rent-free so she'd have somewhere to stay with the baby. The only reason they showed her any compassion was because of the baby. They didn't want to see a child end up homeless, even though I argued she'd probably just manipulate her way into someone else's house. But my parents are good people, too good, really. After the divorce, her lawyer told her to track down the baby's biological father for child support, but Tasha had no idea who he was. She felt entitled enough to dump the baby at my parents' house every morning, claiming she needed time to job hunt. But instead of picking the baby up in the evening, she'd show up late at night or sometimes not at all. My mom ended up becoming the baby's full-time nanny. Dad wasn't having it, though. He told Tasha not to leave the baby with them anymore. Predictably, she threw a tantrum, calling them selfish, unkind, and inhumane for not helping her. She claimed she couldn't find a job and had no one else to rely on. My mom, soft-hearted as ever, caved and continued taking care of the baby, even though Dad was furious about the whole situation. I couldn't stand how much she was taking advantage of my parents, so I decided to step in. I started looking into jobs for her, but what I discovered left me speechless. Tasha wasn't job hunting at all. Instead, she was spending her days at home with a new boyfriend who had moved in and was footing her bills. Apparently, he worked from home and needed quiet, which is why he told her to take the baby to my parents' place. When I found out, I wasted no time telling my parents the truth. That was the final straw for them. They refused to look after the baby anymore and gave her a week's notice to move out of their apartment. Tasha begged her boyfriend to help her find a new place, but he was just using her for a rent-free setup and bailed on her as soon as things got tough. With nowhere else to go, she ended up crashing at a friend's house. Meanwhile, since I'd already started looking for jobs on her behalf, I managed to find her a position as a cleaner at a daycare. I specifically chose that role because the daycare offered to watch her baby while she worked. She was desperate enough to take the job, and I won't lie, I felt a sense of satisfaction seeing her humbled like that. The whole situation still blows my mind. She thought she could cheat, get pregnant, and no one would notice? It's almost laughable. But at the same time, I feel conflicted. Part of me thinks she deserves every bit of hardship she's facing, but I also feel bad for the baby. The kid didn't ask for any of this, and I hope Tasha steps up and raises him right. Now, about my brother. A lot of you have been asking if I should cut ties with him completely. After reading your comments and thinking it through, I decided not to. But things between us will never go back to the way they were before Tasha came into our lives. Noah has distanced himself from the entire family since the divorce. I wasn't sure if I should reach out or just leave him alone, but I'm glad I chose to talk to him. When we finally reconnected, he admitted he felt ashamed for not believing me. The divorce and everything that came with it had left him in a really bad place emotionally. Mending our relationship wasn't easy for me. I was still angry about everything, the way he blindly believed Tasha, the way he turned on me. Trusting your partner is one thing, but choosing to go against your entire family? That's a whole different level of betrayal. At some point, I had to address my anger and resentment head-on. I told him how hurt I was that he'd been the guy my girlfriend cheated with. He broke every bro code in the book. To his credit, he apologized. He admitted he'd learned his lesson about trusting cheaters and even apologized for all the petty things he'd done to me over the years, like taunting me about being single. I'd almost forgotten how many times he'd been an asshole to me, not just recently, but ever since we were kids. Marrying Tasha was just the cherry on top of years of bad behavior. But I think he's finally starting to understand the damage he caused. So, here we are. I'm trying to rebuild something with him, even if it feels like I'm the older brother now. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Thanks to everyone who's been following along and offering advice. Your comments really helped me put things into perspective. As for Tasha, I thought she might finally be getting her act together, but nope, not even close. Turns out, cleaning wasn't her strong suit. Instead of doing her job at the daycare, she seduced the 47-year-old manager and ended up getting promoted to a helper position. The problem? She didn't know the first thing about taking care of kids, not even her own child. Staff members began complaining about how she treated the kids, but the manager turned a blind eye. That didn't last long, though, because the parents started filing complaints too. At that point, the daycare had no choice but to let her go. She begged to stay, but they couldn't risk their reputation any further. To top it off, the manager dumped her, and just like that, she was jobless and desperate again. In a strange twist, Tasha finally managed to track down the baby's father, a guy named Kyle C., a wealthy, middle-aged man of Asian descent. Kyle, it turns out, wasn't exactly a saint either. He was married to a wonderful woman, Rita, and cheating on her was just another day in his life. Tasha showed up at their doorstep, baby in tow, demanding Kyle take responsibility. Of course, Kyle denied everything. When she realized he wasn't going to step up, she called the police and got a lawyer involved. A paternity test confirmed Kyle was, in fact, the father. Rita, who couldn't have children of her own, decided to fight for custody of the baby. But Kyle had no interest in raising the child, so they lost the case. Tasha, on the other hand, only wanted custody to secure child support money, and the court granted her request. Kyle was ordered to pay her a hefty sum every month. With her newfound income, Tasha resumed her usual lifestyle. She left the baby at daycare during the day while she went out searching for her next sugar daddy. Honestly, I didn't think she could stoop any lower, but life has a way of proving me wrong. Fast forward, and her antics finally caught up with her. Tasha moved in with a guy who was deeply involved in drugs, and one night she overdosed while partying with him. For almost 20 hours, no one even noticed she needed help. Meanwhile, her child, left alone in the apartment, managed to open the door and wandered out into the street. The poor kid was nearly hit by a car before neighbors spotted him, took him home, and found Tasha unconscious. They immediately called the authorities. When the police arrived, they discovered the baby had been exposed to dangerous levels of drugs and smoke. He was malnourished, weak, and wearing a soiled diaper. If the little guy hadn't opened the door, it could have ended in tragedy. Tasha was rushed to the hospital, where she stayed for weeks, and the child was placed in protective custody. My brother and I felt terrible for the baby, so we tried to visit him. Eventually, Kyle was contacted and awarded custody, but only after proving he and Rita could take care of the child. What shocked me the most was Rita's reaction. Instead of staying with Kyle, she divorced him. She had all the evidence she needed, proof of his affair and a child from that affair. She left him, secured a sizable alimony settlement, and legally adopted the baby as her own. Rita, who works as a school teacher, poured all her love into raising the child. She allowed my mom to visit him too, knowing how attached she was. My mom never reached out to Tasha again. She didn't want to deal with her drama, but she was overjoyed to see the baby being cared for by someone who truly loved him. As for Tasha, her overdose was a wake-up call, or so I thought. She narrowly survived, spent 6 months in rehab, and was slapped with a hefty fine. If she hadn't paid it, she'd have faced jail time. My brother, feeling some misplaced pity, visited her, thinking she'd be upset about losing her child. But Tasha didn't care about the baby at all. What upset her was losing the child support money. After rehab, the first thing Tasha did was head to Rita's house. That's when she found out Rita had divorced Kyle and was raising the baby as her own. Honestly, I'm relieved the child is finally in a good place. Rita is giving him the love and stability he desperately needs. Tasha, on the other hand, is living proof that bad decisions eventually catch up with you. Her beauty and youth won't last forever, and if she doesn't figure out how to stand on her own 2 feet, her life is only going to get harder. For now, my brother and I are just watching from a distance as news of her antics spreads through town like wildfire. Her reputation is in shambles, and no decent guy would ever want to be with her knowing her track record. I just hope her choices don't end up dragging the baby down with her. Thank you to everyone who's been following this story. Your support and advice have been invaluable. Tasha's downward spiral didn't stop there. She decided to take things a step further and showed up at Rita's house, asking for money in exchange for not trying to take the baby back. Of course, she had no idea Rita had already legally adopted the child. Rita, being the smart and no-nonsense woman she is, called the police on Tasha for extortion and harassment. Not only that, but Rita also got a restraining order against her. The message was crystal clear: if Tasha ever tried to contact the child or come near them again, she'd go straight to jail. The authorities weren't playing around, especially after everything Tasha had done to endanger the baby's life. I find myself reflecting on the whole situation more often than I'd like to admit. Tasha really had everything she needed for a good life when she was with Noah. If only she'd chosen to be faithful and committed, things could have turned out so differently. Noah gave her attention and support, but it seemed like that was never enough for her. She thrived on the validation she got from juggling multiple men at once, and that need for constant attention ultimately destroyed her. She's the one who ruined her life, but the consequences of her actions didn't stop with her, they spilled over to her child and my brother, too. I can't help but think how much pain could have been avoided if she'd just made better choices, or at least been responsible enough to use protection and not drag an innocent baby into her mess. Still, in the end, things somehow worked out for everyone else. Noah finally saw her for who she truly was and got out of a toxic marriage. Rita, despite all the heartbreak, gained a child she loves as her own and seems genuinely happy raising him. And Tasha? Well, she got exactly what she deserved. Some people learn the hard way, others, like Tasha, don't seem to learn at all.